Welcome to On Texas Football. I'm Bobby Burton, your host, joined by CJ Vogel and Gerry Hamilton. We are 3 days away from the start of college football season for the Longhorns. The Longhorns take on Colorado State at DKR at 2:30 on Saturday afternoon. We'll be there, obviously, as many of you will be as well, or watching on TV, whatever you can. This week's State of the Program brought to you by Adam Lowy and the Lowy Law Firm. We're going to talk a little bit about our predictions, so to speak, for this game. But before we get there, guys, there's some pressing issues we want to talk about in this week as we look forward to this very first game. Steve Sarkisian came out on Monday, and CJ, you were at the press conference, and said that, look, we don't really have a starter right now. It's more we're looking at our two deep, and everybody's going to play. And we're going to try to figure out who deserves what. Okay, we've all heard that before. Sark may mean that at a couple of positions this year that we're hearing. Number one, the three that I want to talk about, the platooning situation, potentially at wide receiver, what the latest is on the offensive line, because we're hearing both Cole Hudson and Nato Umeozulu are making runs there, and then what's going on in the secondary. CJ, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to ask you about what you heard from Sark that kind of made you really feel like he's not just – this isn't just lip service that he's giving to the starters / backups this year.
Yeah, of course. He talked about, kind of the week one opener against Rice and how he was able to get 32 or 33 different bodies on the field early in that game. That's great, right? You're expected to see those type of guys filter in, keep your legs fresh in a hot environment. But on top of that, there's another comment, Bobby, that made me think, maybe some spots are still up for grabs. And that was essentially these guys are fighting for reps on the field. And we're going to go with the hot hand at a number of spots. We're going to find ways to get the guys that are playing well and succeeding on the field to stay on the field and be larger parts of our defense. And, of course, you can look to a number of positions right now in which there might be a number of bodies fighting for reps or fighting for snaps at certain spots. We'll get to them, obviously, edge, defensive back, corner, whatever it might be. There are plenty of them. But Sarkisian basically saying we're going to use this first game, Michigan, and the next two to kind of get ourselves an idea of who we can rely on, who we can trust, and who our playmakers are to go into SEC play. It's all going to be a setup for conference play whenever it all arrives.
All right, let's start. Gerry, I'm going to start with you. The offensive line situation. One of the key topics here has always been, is DJ Campbell a year ago this time, is DJ Campbell going to step up and beat out Cole Hudson, right? Although Cole was coming off an injury. This year, it's whether or not Cole or Nato are going to step up and beat out DJ Campbell, correct? So what are your thoughts there, Gerry?
Yeah, I think if we just go back to last year in Tuscaloosa, DJ Campbell was a starter, and when Cole Hudson was healthy, Cole Hudson played more snaps in that game. So I think then Cole Hudson got injured again. And we've been talking that Texas is going to play more guys on the interior of the offensive line this year. I don't know if you call it a rotation in air quotes, right, if you're listening on a podcast or not, but there's definitely going to be a rotation at offensive guard this year. Now, it could be depending on who you play. Your opponent and player strengths and weaknesses on the offensive line. But I do think we're going to see more of Cole Hudson and more of Neto this year. And because obviously Cole Hudson was going to end up playing starter reps, whether he was a starter or not at times last season. So I think we're going to see that again. I think this is an older offensive line. Your tackles are set. That's not happening at tackle. Jake Majors is set at center. That's not happening at center. We're looking at left guard and right guard. And maybe even more right guard than left guard headed into the season because DJ Campbell may not have taken the next big step in fall practice. We'll see if that changes in the games. But expect to see Cole Hudson, expect to see Neto at guards. And I do think this is going to play out on the field starting Saturday.
Let me ask both of you guys this. I mean, is it really possible that we may be talking about a different starting lineup to start the season? CJ, I mean, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think so. And, whether it be from week 1 to week 2 to week 3 and beyond, I think that there is an opportunity for this offensive line to look a little bit different than what we've known it to be dating back to the spring. Of course, there's 4 guys all vying for 2 spots. And For the most part, 3 of them have had a lot of experience, right? Nato kind of being that one guy who's yet to really crack consistently onto the field. But what we've heard dating back to the spring is this is a pretty tight race, Bobby. There's been times all the way dating back to the beginning of fall camp where you'll see that first team unit offensively kind of have different pieces at the guard spot, whether it be a Nato at right guard or Cole Hudson at left or vice versa. They've plugged and placed, all 4 pieces interchangeably almost the entirety of fall camp so far. So I don't think it's out of the picture at all to see a brand new starting 5 come week 1 on Saturday that maybe we weren't expecting a few weeks ago.
And I want to add this. Communication on the right side is big for me. Cameron Williams is he's a first-time starter. He started 1 game against Kansas State when Christian Jones was injured, but this is his first year as a starter. Last year, DJ Campbell could look to his left and see Jake Majors, look to his right and see Christian Jones. This year, Cam Williams is going to be looking in. And is DJ Campbell, is he strong in communication from Jake Majors to him to Cam Williams? Because it's not like Cam Williams can ask Jake Majors a question. Okay, there's a line of communication on the offensive line, and I think we talk about that. We may not talk about that enough. I think that's going to be a key on the offensive line on the right side this year because you're not preparing so much for Colorado State. You're preparing for what's going to happen in Ann Arbor. And then the other thing I would say, what makes the guards interesting is DJ Campbell and Neto are your best run blockers. Hayden Connor, maybe your best in pass pro at the guard position. Cole Hudson maybe is the best mix of both in all actuality. So how do those parts fit together, and when do they fit together?
Look, I think Texas has pieces to the puzzle. They got to figure out what the actual puzzle looks like, and make sure that they're putting the best guys out there. They're going to use this week to try to figure that out. I just wonder. I mean, just from hearing things behind the scenes, I wonder whether or not we're going to see somebody other than DJ Campbell start. Not saying I'm for sure about that. Just there's rumblings, and so we'll see what happens on Saturday. All right, let's talk next about the secondary before we get into the wide receiver. In the secondary, guys, what are y'all's thoughts on what Texas is trying to do here with Jalen Gilbo and Jahdae Barron? I mean, they've both seen so many starters reps. They've added Andrew Makuba. We hear Gavin Holmes has had a good fall camp. CJ, I'll start with you. What do you think Texas is really attempting to do? Is it just about versatility, or is it about getting the best 11 on the field at a time, maybe?
I think in a sense it is the latter of that, Bobby. Get the best 11 on the field, but also the guys that Texas is trying to get on the field a bit more in my eyes is Jalen Gilbo and find a spot for Jahdae Barron, right? That provides you the opportunity to have guys who are very capable of making plays up on the ball. And that's been the constant for Jahdae Barron his entire time on the field at Texas. And what we've heard from Jalen Gilbo since returning back from injury, right? Going back to the spring, if you will, there was probably no more impactful football player, maybe sans Anthony Hill, than Jalen Gilbo in some of those scrimmages. He was the MVP of a few of them, and we know that to be the case because he was so close to the football and so impactful there. If you're able to have a guy like him and a guy like Jahdae Barron on the field at the same time, plus an Andrew Makuba or Derek Williams or Michael Taft, guys who are all able to go after the football in that secondary, that's huge for the Texas defense, which is looking to become more opportunistic, as we've talked about so far this fall. So I think it's more about finding the right combination of guys who can go out there and make plays on the football, create turnovers, create negative plays, and do such in that manner. Gavin Holmes, to his credit, though, hasn't gone quietly, and you're going to see a lot of them on Saturday as a result of another strong camp this last month or so. So whatever the combination is, I do wonder, and I don't have clarity on this right now, I do wonder if there's a look in the red zone that they give out a little bit different in a personnel package. Maybe not week 1 against Colorado State, but maybe against Michigan, you see a different defensive back package in that red zone secondary area. And when that gets tight, Texas moves maybe more to a zone or a man, whatever the strengths might be of that personnel grouping, just to get Jahdae, Jalen, Manny all on the field together, whereas that kind of fits their personnel and their strengths a little bit more so than, in between the 20s.
Hey, Gerry, I got to ask you about the actual safety situation. because what CJ was really describing was the star position vis-a-vis the cornerbacks and who would be the starter there. What about Andrew Makuba, Michael Taft, and Derek Williams? Those appear to be the top three safeties. Jelani McDonald, Steve Sarkisian mentioned him earlier this week as having a good go at it. But those top three safeties, is Makuba the guy back there that you have to have on the field, or is that Taft, who is kind of, a lot of people think he's a little bit of the soul of that defense right now? What are your thoughts on the safety position?
It's wild, but it almost goes back to the offensive line for me. It's the communication. I think Derek Williams, really good player, is the communication is strong from that standpoint if he's called upon to be the communicator versus a Makuba and a Michael Taft. I think that's the question that's going to have to be answered. What's interesting about that is Derek Williams, the first day that they wore the headsets defensively in practice, he was one of the three guys. So, but we've also heard that maybe that strong voice and communication may not be where he's at right now. We'll see when the season begins. And so with Derek Williams, the two things I've been looking at are making more plays on the ball and being the strong communicator. And that comes in time with different guys. So is Makuba, we know Taft's strength is there. Makuba had to at least be pretty good in that regard based on how Clemson played him and used him, right? That's one of the things you heard is the system, the communication was strong. Because I keep going back to that first the first media window practice where we were there for an hour. It's normally 20 minutes. So we got to the point where Johnny Nansen was out there running things in the secondary. And all the communication went through Nansen out to that secondary. And Rod Baber sat there and is kind of looking at that and kind of commented how many different packages they played in the secondary at Arizona under Johnny Nansen. So who can communicate all that on the field for Johnny Nansen? I think that's going to hold a lot of the cards at the safety position in terms of snaps.
I think that's a good point. And I will add this. I mean, who do y'all think opens up with the helmet communication on defense? I mean, is it Taft? Is it Makuba? Is it Anthony Hill? Is it Derek Williams? Is it Jade Barron or Jalen Gilbo? I mean, do we know? I mean, I think we would be guessing right now. And furthermore, I think that what we also talked about is it could be different for different teams.
Yeah.
I mean, it might be someone in the secondary when you're playing a air raid type system like Colorado State, whereas it might be Anthony Hill come Michigan time when they're going to maybe give you a 3 tight end look half the game.
That's a great point. It's a great point, Bobby, because if Johnny Nansen is making defensive back calls and against the Colorado State, then you could see a defensive back having the headset in that game.
All right. Before we talk talk about the receiver position and what we think is going on there right now, or actually what we know a little bit about what's going on, I want to say thank you to our sponsor. That's Adam Lowy over at the Lowy Law Firm. Give him a shout if you would. If you have been in a car wreck, truck wreck, automobile accident of any kind, including ATV, golf cart, what have you, and you think you might be due compensation, visit him at loweylawfirm.com. That's loweylawfirm.com. He and his team will give you a free consultation, no strings attached, loweylawfirm.com. Adam, thank you for sponsoring Coffee and Football, as well as each week's State of the Program. All right, guys, let's keep going here. Here's what we know, at least at this point, about what it's looking like at wide receiver. We are hearing it's going to be a platoon situation, at least at the outset. Not perfect. We don't know if it's going to continue into the second half, but what we're hearing is it may be phase 1 and phase 2, and try to figure out who makes plays, and then let's go to Ann Arbor with the guys that we think are the ones that are going to help us win. And then either it stays at 6 or 7 in the rotation, and it may get trimmed down to 5. It may get trimmed down to 4. You just never know based on exactly what transpires in football games. So, CJ, I'll let you start. What do you think about the idea of a platoon at wide receiver?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I know that there's a lot of different personalities and different, strengths for the wide receiver position that this group brings. But we've heard it consistently from Steve Sarkisian this fall. It's not just finding the best 3 or 4 wide receivers. It's about finding the best combination of wide receivers on the field together. So if you feel good about the platoon and maybe a Silas Bolden working well with a Ryan Wingo or a Jonte Cook and an Isaiah Bond on the field together, then, hey, I think that plays well to what you can do offensively with those guys and those pairings on the field together. Of course, that's up to Sarkisian and Chris Jackson to kind of finalize and see what works, but it's also up to Quinn Ewers. Which groupings does he work best with? Is there a wide receiver that he goes to more? Who does he look to on a 3rd and 4, a 3rd and 7, a 3rd and long? I think that's going to be pretty telling. A year ago, we knew what he was able to do with an Xavier Worthy and A.D. Mitchell, but on some of those key 3rd downs, what did he look to do? He looked to go over the middle to a Jordan Whittington or a Jatavian Sanders. That was kind of his safety blanket. Is there a guy right now that kind of takes that step as a safety blanket for him? We heard in the spring, and I hate going back to the spring because it's so long ago, but it's one of those weird things that I think carries over through the summer and into the fall. Matthew Golden was a guy that he leaned on pretty heavily for those kind of we need to convert now kind of situations. So where he is on that field and what kind of group he's in, I think will kind of give you an idea of where Quinn will go as well in those must convert situations. But it'll be interesting to see what kind of success comes as a result of that platoon system. If Quinn finds rhythm with one or the other or one player in particular, first time we've seen this under Sarkisian. So it'll be a learning curve just as much for us as it will be for them, in my eyes, to see what actually works and what doesn't.
I can tell you, I think the biggest thing, Bobby, is route recognition. Period, like full stop type of thing. Who does Sark and Quinn trust to run the route correctly with the correct timing? I mean, that if not, it throws everything off. And I know DeAndre Moore has been one of those guys. Am I saying he's going to be the starter in the most targets? No. I think Silas Bolden and Matthew Golden may end up being the leading receivers as far as catches on this team. That's my prediction on a prediction show. But I think Silas Bolden factors in heavily, whether he starts or not. It's like Sir Jabari Rice on the Texas Elite Eight basketball team. Sometimes it doesn't matter who's in the game when it counts. That is what matters. And in critical downs and critical situations. But I think the route recognition, but we've heard Ryan Wingo is about 40-45% of the playbook. There was about 33% after the first scrimmage. So 40-45% of the playbook, only playing X. So that is a guy that you're going to bring along probably more slowly. That doesn't mean he's not going to make 2 big plays against Colorado State. But I do think the experienced guys, look, the way football works out a lot of times is experienced guys get the first shot, especially in a Colorado State game. A DeAndre Moore and a Jonte Cook, they've invested, they get an opportunity, right? But if they crack the door, if the door's cracked open, there's a lot of experienced, really talented players there at their position. You know, Isaiah Bond is going to be a big part of this offense because even if he's a decoy, his ability to stretch the field and what he's done in his career. And I'm not saying he's a decoy. I mean, he could have 45 catches for 650 yards and be a decoy at times down the field to open the middle of the field up on a vertical route. But I think route recognition is going to be huge. Who do Sark and Quinn trust? I think we're going to start to see that in game 1. And I think that carries over the game 2. But I do think this conversation we're having is going to be completely different by the Oklahoma game.
Yeah.
I look at it, and what we're really trying to decipher here is who's the best mix and match, with the whole thing. I want to say this. Another thing that I think is important when you talk about route recognition, just to give people some color and example of what that is. If it's a zone and your guy is actually running a man pattern, he doesn't adjust to run a zone and sit down in a zone. That's what you're talking about. And that's experience. That's something that, frankly, Silas Bolden has more than anybody on the team, probably, right? Then you have Isaiah Bond and Matthew Golden next, followed by Jonte Cook, DeAndre Moore, and then lastly, Ryan Wingo. So route recognition is not just experience, it's also application of it. And Cook Bolden have caught the most passes. Excuse me, Bolden and Bond have caught the most passes. So they've probably seen it more than anybody else. Golden, obviously, a 2-year starter at the University of Houston as well. So we'll see how it all winds up. My thought on it is I want to see everybody get the ball in their hands in game one to see who the playmaker is. Because I think they're going to have good players. All of those guys are good players. But which one's your playmaker? Which one is going to score touchdowns for you? All of them can score touchdowns. We know that, or else they wouldn't be at Texas in the first place. But who makes the play that everybody else can't make, right? And gives your chance gives your team a better chance of winning the ball game. All right, that's going to be that section. We talked about the main positions we think are going to be up for grabs of sorts. Let's talk about our prediction for this weekend. I think it's time. We've been going at this a lot. We're going to have other shows later this week and talking about different things. But in this state of the program, the question is Texas favored currently, I think, by 31.5, according to a lot of the money lines out there. That, shelves out to about a 43-12, 43-13, 44-13 kind of game for Texas in this scenario. Y'all taking the over on that? Are y'all taking the points or not? This isn't simply about whether or not Texas should win, right? I mean, we think Texas should absolutely win based on what we know. But is Colorado State maybe a little bit better on offense than people are giving them credit for? And maybe with all these, older guys on defense, a little bit better and going to be more stingy than perhaps they were a year ago. I mean, I've got questions both ways, and then you're sitting there looking at Texas and so many new faces on offense for Texas in the skill position. It's hard to gauge this one. I have Texas covering, but I want to say this: I would not be surprised if Colorado State somehow, some way, puts 21 points on the board.
Yeah, I was going.
Texas has to go big.
Yeah, I'm thinking 56-21, 52-17 in that area code for a few reasons. One, when Sark brought up in the press conference Monday, CJ, I want to see a better start to the season than we had against Rice. He's putting a lot of emphasis on that. So there's that point. I think Colorado State, if their offensive tackles again. When Rice came to Houston last year, what was Rice accustomed to? The heat and humidity. That was an even playing field in terms of the weather. This is not an even playing field. Now, if the rain comes, and that could change the whole thing. It could be 30-14. I mean, who knows, right? So we're staying away from that. But the weather was even last year in the opener. Texas had a bunch of false starts. Just a bunch of shoot yourself in the foot type of penalties last year. Sark wants a cleaner game. He expects a cleaner game. I expect he'll get a cleaner game on your front, your offensive front. That, I think, is where his emphasis is. Colorado State, if they can't establish the run, their offensive tackles are in for a long game. Now, I also think midway through the third quarter and to finish the game, I think Texas could cover there if they haven't beforehand, because Colorado State's going to be a tired team. There is no doubt. I don't care. You can say, "Oh, it's been a warm summer in college." You can say whatever you want, but it's different. It's just different. The humidity, the heat, the combination, especially if it rains before the game. So I just think Sark is pushing his guys to have a really big game, to have a different mindset than the Rice game last year, because obviously I think we know Texas was probably looking ahead at Bama a little bit. I don't think that's going to be the case with this team this year. I think that's a year older team. And now I'll add the third piece to this. What we haven't talked about yet is, 12 teams are going to try to get into a college football playoff. And I don't want to say you have to run it up. I think we haven't talked about this. Well, style points are out because it's 12-team playoff. I don't know. Style points may be more in. I don't think Arch is going to come into the game and hand it off. I think they got to get Arch ready to play. I think if you can beat them 56-17, you got to do it. Because what if you're coming down it comes down to the wire, and you don't know what's going to happen. If it's you and 3 other teams to get in a couple of playoff spots, I mean, look, I hate to say you run it up on people, but I do think style points still count, guys.
Fair point. CJ?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'm with you, Gerry. I think if the heat's there, the score gets out of hand late. In fact, I think if the heat is what we think it is and what it has been this summer, Colorado State probably doesn't score in the second half because of that rotation of bodies Texas has and in which they plan on using them. I was looking at the numbers of bodies Texas used week 1 against Rice. Again, and I'll talk about the first half here in a bit, but the rotation of bodies, they used 36 players defensively week 1 versus 22 against Alabama. So they have an idea of who those guys are going to be, but they want to see that whole unit work to and kind of showcase itself before kind of tightening things down against that marquee matchup week 2. Offensively, it went from 29 bodies to 20. Obviously, late against Rice week 1 a year ago, things got, to where you wanted it to be score-wise a little bit later. But the starts have to be better. And I say that again, as we've seen against Rice and Wyoming a year ago, right? It was 10-10 entering the fourth quarter before Xavier Worthy took a screen pass and found a slip down the end zone and found a touchdown on the first play of the fourth quarter. I think people kind of forget that. It was 16-3 against Rice, in which Texas kicked 3 field goals in the second quarter alone. And you're sitting there frustrated as hell at halftime, sweating like crazy, wondering, why can't this team find the end zone? Little did we know that was going to be a precursor for the rest of the season. So what I want to see against Colorado State is execution once you get past the other 40, right? Find ways to get that ball into the end zone. I think that they've been working on that all year. In fact, I know that as a result, I think that they find success early against Colorado State. As a result, the score I wrote down was 48-10 originally, and I'm going to stick with it. I just think Texas has had such an emphasis on secondary, such an emphasis on scoring in the red zone, that those are the issues that they come out and solve right away week 1 this year. Now, if I'm wrong, then hey, maybe they still got to go back to the lab, or maybe they just haven't shown what they want to show going into the SEC and saving that for conference play. But that's kind of where my mind is leading me right now, is that all offseason we've heard secondary, we've heard pass rush, and we've heard red zone scoring. It's going to be an emphasis. Start out strong and let that heat work to your advantage. 48-10. I'm punching it in, Bobby. Don't take that for gambling advice at all, because I don't think I want a week 0 bet at all. So, but that's how I'm feeling right now.
Well, that all makes sense. Look, I think everybody that listens to this, hopefully they do realize, look, you gotta, week 1 is the hardest week of the year, in my opinion, to decipher, because there's so many unknowns, especially now with the transfer portal. Man, how many new faces come from the transfer portal, and you just don't know how they're going to mix. I mean, what's Texas going to do with this defensive line rotation? Is it going to be successful or not? Just a lot of different pieces to the puzzle that I think we have to all be cognizant of as we look forward to it. I am extraordinarily excited, though. Again, the game starts 2:30 on Saturday at DKR against Colorado State, just 3 days away, 72 hours. In fact, probably by the time you're watching this show. So we will see soon what exactly the Longhorns have in store for Colorado State. Hopefully, it's open up a can of you-know-what on the Colorado State Rams. All right, for CJ Vogel and Gerry Hamilton, as well as our producer, Matt Hutchison, thank you also to Adam Lowy of the Lowy Law Firm. He and his firm have sponsored On Texas Football, stay of the program for quite some time. Make sure you give them a call or reach out to them at Lowy Law Firm if you have any need or in a rec where you need some level of help and representation. Again, LowyLawFirm.com. Gerry, CJ, until next time, and everyone else, until next time, hook 'em.